this has blown it all up again. And so I don't think we will ever get, sadly, to the truth of what happened. Well, it's been a huge week this week with the publication of Omid Scobie's new book, Endgame. And I think the thing that has really supercharged royal reporting this week has been the allegations in the Dutch version of Endgame that two senior royals had concerns, according to Meghan, about the skin colour of Prince Archie. There's been a lot of controversy over these allegations that were printed in the Dutch version of Endgame, not in any other copy of the book, certainly not in the English version. And in fact, an entire paragraph that's in the Dutch version that was given to Dutch reporters to review the book has been removed from the English version. The author, Omid Scobie, says that it was a mistake by the publishers. Initially, the publishers said it was a translation error. Then they changed it to it was just a mistake. We still don't know how those two names got into the Dutch version. But what we do know is that Meghan and Harry's story about the alleged racist royal has chopped and changed over the years. And it all started with that bombshell interview on Oprah in March 2021.
There are several conversations.
There's a conversation with you?
With Harry.
About how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh.
When I watched that original interview in March 2021, I was shell-shocked. I wasn't surprised necessarily that Meghan, while she was talking to Oprah, because of course, if we remember, it was Meghan and Oprah first, Harry was brought in afterwards. I wasn't surprised that Meghan said that the royal family was guilty of unconscious bias or racism, but I didn't think that she would be so specific. She didn't name names, but she said that there were concerns raised about the colour of her unborn child. And she specifically centred that within the context that there was a conversation about Archie potentially not getting security and potentially not getting titles. Now, for me as a royal reporter, I separate out those two things. We all knew that as Harry was sixth in line to the throne at that point, his son was not necessarily going to get the security that, say, Prince William gets, as at the time the second in line. And also there is this convention that at the time Archie was the great grandchild of the monarch, and at that point great-grandchildren don't get titles unless they are directly in the line of succession, like George, Louis and Charlotte. So for her to link effectively racism and something that had always been there, I thought was quite unfair.
That conversation I'm never going to share, but at the time it was awkward. I was a bit shocked.
Then when Harry was brought in, he actually gave us more detail and said that Meghan hadn't even been there when this conversation happened. He said it was very awkward. He said he was never going to reveal the name of that person because it was just private to him. But of course, that was 2021. While Oprah afterwards said it wasn't the Queen or Prince Philip. In fact, that made it worse because then the whole world was left guessing, well, who was it? Which senior royal was it? Because the pool then was much smaller. Harry then turned the whole thing on its head in January 2023, this year, when he told the nation in an ITV interview he'd never accused anyone in the family of being racist. In fact, the interviewer, Tom Bradbury, kind of reacted with surprise when Harry said, no, I never accused anyone of racist. I said, and Tom visibly was like, what? Harry said it was unconscious bias. And Harry said, living within my family, I wasn't surprised.
In the Oprah interview, you accuse members of your family of racism. You don't even...
No, we didn't.
Well,
The British press said that.
Right.
Did Meghan ever mention that they were racist?
She said there were troubling comments about Archie's
there was
skin
concern
colour.
about his skin colour.
Right. Wouldn't you describe that as essentially racist?
I wouldn't, not having lived within that family.
I think even those who are the most supportive of Prince Harry and Meghan were slightly incredulous at this claim by Harry. It is very Prince Harry to always blame everything on the British press and indeed the rest of his family. and never look perhaps at himself. And then earlier this year, The Telegraph published a story that Meghan had actually wrote letters to King Charles, or rather the two, Meghan and Charles, had exchanged letters after the Oprah interview to discuss this claim and to discuss what she and Harry had said in the Oprah interview, where she allegedly said she was just raising concerns about unconscious bias. In the Telegraph story that was published earlier this year, it was that Charles wrote to Meghan, reached out to her after the Oprah interview. We don't know when this exchange of letters took place, but we can perhaps assume or infer that it was around the summer of 2021. And Meghan went into more detail about what she viewed as the concerns and the story about around Archie's skin colour. Remember, this was never said to Meghan directly. This came via Prince Harry, according to Harry on that Oprah interview, and then the two exchanged letters. And then we come to this week, to the big explosive story this week around Omid Scobie's new book, Endgame. Firstly, he said he privately knew, this was in TV interviews to publicise his book on American TV. Firstly, he said that he knew the identity of the royal racist, so dubbed royal racist, but couldn't disclose it because of UK libel laws. Then it was accidentally named, he and his publishers say, in a Dutch edition. The book's publishers said this was a publishing error, and Scobie now says he never submitted a book with any names in it. So what actually happened? I am personally always of the cock-up, not conspiracy school of thought. So in my personal opinion, this was a huge cock-up. At some stage, this was written down. And if you look at the book in Dutch, I'm not a Dutch speaker myself, but even I can recognise English Christian names. If you look at the book in Dutch, it very clearly, the punctuation very clearly shows that this was not a translation error. That name was put there specifically. And in the later section, where a whole paragraph has been removed and a second senior royal is named, that has just been taken out, and it is not in the English version of the book. It is not a translation error, it is there, and I suspect, just my personal opinion, I suspect that this was an earlier version of the book before it was legaled. That happens with anything that I write. Lawyers go through it very, very carefully to make sure you are not defaming anyone, and probably a lawyer said, you cannot have this, take it out. But unfortunately, because the book was translated into so many different languages, it got through, slipped through the net. Will we ever get to the truth of what happened? I don't think we will, unless someone, Meghan, Harry, Charles, William, comes out and says what actually happened. Now, I don't think any of the senior royals will come out and say, and I say Charles and William as the two kind of most senior royals really within the British royal family, I don't think anyone from this side of the pond is going to say, well, this is what actually happened. The royals are very much never complain, never explain. Buckingham Palace has said that they're considering all options, they're considering legal action. Harry and Meghan, well, I actually think it'd be more helpful if they did come out and just say, well, here's the letter. But then if they do that, there will be any hope of reconciliation. Just last week, we were talking about perhaps Meghan and Harry would be invited to Sandringham or Balmoral, that there were conversations happening now with Harry and Charles. Again, after that lack of trust that had been, that Charles and William felt that had been blown so open, their relationship, that they could never speak to their brother and son again. That had started to heal a little. I think this has blown it all up again. And so I don't think we will ever get, sadly, to the truth of what happened, which is why naming names is so unfair.